consolidating his position of power and bringing in Goldman Sachs Democrats like Gary Cohen, we see some pushback in terms of parody. I want to take a look at some of the comedy that has been some ad hominem comedy attacks that have come out. The Hill reports that White House staff was passing around an Onion article that was parodying Kushner. Of course, he's now being put in charge of the Middle East as well. So the Onion said that Jared Kushner was quietly transferring solve the Middle East crisis as a to-do list to next week's to-do list. They said ushering in lasting peace across the Middle East is definitely still a big priority for me, but given everything else that I've got going on right now, I'm just going to need to bump it to next week when I have a little bit more time on my hands. He acknowledged that he was just a bit too swamped at the moment with policy reports, real estate development meetings to resolve the numerous wars, land disputes, and centuries-old ethnic and religious tensions that have long raged among the 350 million residents of the geopolitical hotspot. Now, along those lines, we had some really hysterical pictures of Jared and one of his friends walking around in their khaki pants and their blazers, wearing a bulletproof vest on the outside. And of course, the hashtag on that was hashtag Kushner at war. I just want to show you a couple of these here. People started posting these pictures and adding spins on movie titles. For example, putting the picture up and saying a Full Metal Jackass or Close Encounters of the Thurston Howell III kind, you know, the guy from Gilligan's Island, or The Douche of Hazard. Again, another one, G.I. Jared, or letters, Dearest Ivanka, war is hell. None of the men here know how to prepare a Cosmo or the foie gras I procured. I may not survive. Another one, Saving Private Equity, or Zero Dork 30, in the Armani now, U.S. Air Force, H-A-E-I-R. And then there's this, Twits Krieg. You know, Leanne McAdoo has a report. You know, it looks like there may be a gag order, not an order to stop the gags, but an order to stop anybody talking about the influence of Kushner and Ivanka in the White House under Donald Trump. Is there a gag order at Breitbart to not talk about Jared Kushner?
Senior editors at Breitbart News have instructed their employees to stop writing any articles that are critical of Jared Kushner. Now, this is according to Business Insider. They say that people familiar with the matter spoke to them, and after the New York Times reported on the weekend that allies of Kushner had complained to President Trump about the negative coverage he was receiving from Breitbart News, we can see that they've sort of changed their tune with articles covering Kushner. They kind of fell silent on the matter. Now, Kushner is, of course, President Trump's son-in-law. He's also a senior White House advisor. And there have been reports that there's been kind of a feud going on with him and the White House chief strategist, Stephen Bannon, who, of course, is the former executive chairman of Breitbart News. So one of the stories that Breitbart reported, they suggested that Kushner was leaking negative information about Stephen Bannon to the press. And another article ran down a list of some of the delicate problems that Trump has entrusted to his son-in-law Kushner, where they accurately note that he boasts a very thin resume in diplomacy. Now, that might be critical, but it's absolutely true. And this has a lot of people concerned because it seems as though Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are playing a much more pivotal role in Trump's administration than anyone could have even predicted. And some of the things that President Trump has now entrusted with Jared, his portfolio, has grown to include everything from remaking American businesses and the VA to handling U.S. relations with Mexico and China to forging peace in the Middle East. That's right. And so, of course, on April 2nd, Jared actually flew to Iraq at the invitation of the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, where he met the ire of the internet because as he's out there, he wears a bulletproof vest over his sport coat in full preppy regalia. It actually sparked a hilarious Twitter hashtag where people are just making fun of him. And this just kind of goes to show the experience that he does not have in dealing with forging peace in the Middle East. Now, Dr. Steve Pachenik was on the Alex Jones show today, and he spoke about why he feels Donald Trump needs to let Jared Kushner know that he's fired.
I don't know Jared Kushner. I assume the best of him. He comes out of a family that was involved in real estate. He's involved in real estate. His father was indicted and then convicted. The problem is they have some major properties in Manhattan. One in particular, which I know very well, is 666 Fifth Avenue. Billions of dollars have been foreclosed upon on the Kushner family, and they can't refinance that property. All it takes in the business of real estate, and believe me, I know this very well, is for one major property to go under for billions of dollars, and then it starts to be a domino effect. Kushner is a highly vulnerable target for the Chinese, for the Russians, and any foreign individuals, because their family was doing private business with the Chinese. It's the Chinese who came in and told them, we'll take care of you. Now, he can resign if he wants, he can do whatever he wants. Nevertheless, from a counterintelligence point of view, Kushner and many of those civilians there are really prime targets for foreign governments in terms of manipulation and leveraging. And if I were Jared Kushner, I would leave the White House and do the best thing he could, just say to America, thank you very much, and go back to his real estate business. Otherwise, he becomes a liability. And that liability as a civilian, it doesn't matter whether he's a son-in-law or not, becomes a great liability.
There is a serious issue with the rise of Jared and Ivanka in terms of their influence at the White House. And a good example of this is this article from Axios talking about how Trump is planning a centrist push and Priebus is on board. Bannon may not be, and if he's not, he will be pushed out because they said there's this changing culture here. They said it's changing from nationalist versus globalist to combat versus collaboration. In other words, if you were going to push back against the changes that are happening very rapidly in the Trump White House, then you're going to be pushed out. If you take a combative approach, you have to become a collaborator with the Goldman Sachs globalists. And we've seen this. We've seen Jared Kushner bring in the Obamacare architect, Zeke Emanuel, brother of Rahm Emanuel, multiple times. The guy who was adamant that Obamacare would not be repealed. And even though we've seen wonderful moves at the beginning of the Trump administration against the TPP, we've now seen Gary Cohen bringing in the architect of the TPP to push back against NAFTA. On climate change, we saw Donald Trump bring in a very combative attorney general who had pushed back against the EPA's legal overreach. And we had some great moves to stop this overreach by the EPA. And yet, when it came to the Paris Climate Treaty and that executive action, we hear that Ivanka pushed very hard for that not to be talked about, or the endangerment clause to not be shut down. So if you leave these structures there, just like Obamacare, then that is the dangerous thing. And that is the globalist approach that is there. So how is this all being shaken up? Well, we see another person being taken out of the National Security Council. Of course, we lost first General Flynn, then we lost Steve Bannon last week. Now we see K.T. McFarland, who was brought in by General Flynn. She has now been pushed out by McMaster. They say that he was given, of course, by Donald Trump. This is the Daily Caller. McMaster was given the authority to restructure the National Security Council to suit his particular needs. Reports circulating in February suggested that McFarland might leave. However, she told The Hill at that time that she would stay on. She said, I just met with the president. He asked me to stay on. I'm thrilled to do so. However, now we see that she is leaving just a couple of months later. So she's being pushed out. Gary Cohen, again, who brought in the architect of TPP to push back against any reform of NAFTA, is being talked about as the new candidate for chief of staff. And then as K.T. McFarland is leaving, we're seeing someone else take her place, Dinah Habib Powell, an Egyptian who came here at the age of 4. She speaks Egyptian. And of course, she was brought in first as Ivanka Trump's advisor, telling her how to navigate in Washington, as they talked about in Fortune magazine. She was the incoming first daughter's partner with Diana Powell. So she was going to fine-tune her powerful new role. Well, as they say, she was the go-to person on women's issues. Now she is going to be advising Donald Trump on national security. And back when she was advising her on women's issues, the Washington Post said, well, we love her positions on issues. The only problem is they're not Donald Trump's positions. They're Hillary Clinton's positions. And that's what we're seeing in national security, in foreign policy, and economic and trade issues as the Goldman Sachs people take over. Well, that's it for tonight's news. Join us again tomorrow night at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.